I met Chase at a Thanksgiving turkey drive in 2013, and honestly, I knew right away he was exactly what I was looking for. He had this wholesome, stable energy that just screamed husband material, the kind of guy who'd take care of me, provide security, make a good life together. He was volunteering his Saturday to help families in need, which showed he had a good heart, and from the way he carried himself, I could tell he had his life together financially. When he smiled at me across the donation tables, I made sure to position myself where we'd naturally end up working side by side, sorting canned goods and making easy conversation about how important it was to give back to the community. I've always been good at reading people, and Chase was refreshingly straightforward compared to the losers I've been dating. He asked me for coffee the next week, which led to dinner dates, which led to us becoming a couple by Christmas. The whole progression felt natural and right, like we were building toward something real and lasting. He was cautious at first. Apparently some girl in college had really done a number on him, cheating with his roommate or something equally devastating. But I made sure to be everything she wasn't. Where she had been reckless and selfish, I was thoughtful and giving. Where she had taken him for granted, I showed genuine appreciation for his kindness and stability. Those first 2 years of dating were honestly perfect. Chase was romantic without being overwhelming, successful without being arrogant, and he clearly adored me in a way that felt both flattering and secure. He'd surprise me with little thoughtful gestures, remember things I'd mentioned wanting, and always made me feel like I was the most important person in his world. When he proposed at his family's gathering in 2015, with both our families there beaming at us, I felt this incredible sense of accomplishment. Here was this amazing man choosing me, offering me the exact life I'd always wanted: stability, comfort, a beautiful future together. Our wedding in 2016 was everything I'd dreamed of, and moving into his townhouse felt like stepping into the life I was meant to have. Chase had owned the place since before we met, and it was gorgeous, spacious, well-maintained, in a great neighborhood. Those first couple of years of marriage really were splendid. I loved being Mrs. Chase Mitchell, loved how people looked at us as this perfect couple, loved the security of knowing I was building a life with someone who would always put our relationship first. Chase was incredibly devoted, always looking for ways to make me happy, planning little surprises and romantic gestures, even years into our marriage. He'd cook my favorite meals, suggest weekend trips to places I'd mentioned wanting to visit, and genuinely seemed to light up whenever I walked into a room. I appreciated all of it, obviously, but after a while, that kind of predictable devotion started feeling less like romance and more like routine. He was wonderful, don't get me wrong, but wonderful in such a safe, expected way that I sometimes found myself wondering if this was really all there was to married life. By early 2019, about 3 years in, I started noticing how other men looked at me. I'd maintained my figure, kept up with fashion, and I could tell I was still attractive to guys who didn't see me every single day doing mundane married people things. At work, there was this new guy, Ryan, who'd started in our corporate office, and he had this energy that was completely different from Chase's steady reliability. Ryan was charming in an unpredictable way, funny without trying so hard, and when he complimented me, it felt exciting rather than expected. I started looking forward to our conversations at work, the way he'd find excuses to stop by my department, how he'd text me funny observations about our ridiculous management, or ask my opinion on projects he was working on. It was refreshing to talk to someone who saw me as Jenna the person, not just Jenna the wife who fit so perfectly into Chase's well-organized life. Ryan made me feel interesting and dynamic, like I had thoughts and opinions worth seeking out, instead of just being the other half of a couple that everyone already had figured out. The texting started innocently enough, work stuff, then funny observations about our coworkers, then more personal conversations about our interests and backgrounds. Ryan was easy to talk to, and he seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts about everything, from movies to politics to travel destinations. When Chase would come home and launch into his usual routine of asking about my day, making dinner, and settling in for another predictable evening of television, I'd find myself thinking about the interesting conversation I'd had with Ryan, or looking forward to continuing our text thread after Chase went to bed. I wasn't doing anything wrong. Obviously, having a friendship with a coworker isn't a crime, and it's not like I was hiding it from Chase. I just didn't feel the need to give him a play-by-play of every interaction I had at work. If anything, my friendship with Ryan was making me happier, which should have been good for my marriage. But Chase started getting clingy and needy in a way that honestly irritated me. He'd want to cuddle on the couch when I was trying to answer texts, or suggest we go to bed early when I was in the middle of an interesting conversation. His timing was terrible, and his constant need for attention started feeling suffocating. The physical side of our marriage began feeling like another obligation rather than something I actually wanted. Chase would try to initiate intimacy, and I'd find myself going through the motions while thinking about other things. It wasn't that he was bad at it, exactly, but everything about our physical relationship had become so routine and predictable. He knew exactly what I liked, which sounds like it should be good, but it also meant there were never any surprises, never any excitement or spontaneity. I started making excuses to avoid it, claiming I was tired or stressed. And honestly, I usually was tired of the same conversations, the same routines, the same everything. When Ryan suggested we grab drinks after work one evening, it felt like exactly what I needed. Adult conversation with someone who didn't expect me to be grateful for basic relationship maintenance. We ended up talking for hours about everything and nothing, and I realized how long it had been since I'd felt intellectually stimulated by someone. Ryan was well-read, well-traveled, and he had opinions about things that Chase never even thought about. When he walked me to my car, and there was this moment of tension between us, this electricity that I hadn't felt in years, I knew I was in dangerous territory, but I also knew I deserved to feel that alive, that desired, that interesting to someone. Chase loved me, sure, but he loved the version of me that fit perfectly into his comfortable life. Ryan was attracted to the real me, the complex person with thoughts and desires that went beyond being the perfect wife. When he kissed me in the parking garage, it felt like waking up from a long, boring dream. I kissed him back because it felt amazing to be wanted like that, to be seen as someone worth taking risks for. The affair started as an emotional thing, then became physical. And honestly, I was good at managing both relationships without letting them interfere with each other. With Chase, I was the devoted wife who kept house and maintained our social calendar and supported his career. With Ryan, I was the passionate, exciting woman who brought adventure and spontaneity to his life. Both versions were real parts of who I am, and I didn't see why I should have to choose between security and excitement, between stability and passion. I was careful about covering my tracks, creating believable stories about working late or meeting girlfriends for dinner when I was actually with Ryan. Chase never questioned my explanations because he trusted me completely, which made it easy to maintain both relationships without anyone getting hurt. What he didn't know couldn't damage our marriage, and what I was doing with Ryan didn't change how I felt about the life Chase and I had built together. I was just adding some excitement to my existence, some passion that had been missing from my daily routine. For months, I managed everything perfectly. Chase got the reliable wife he'd married. Ryan got the exciting affair partner he craved. And I got the best of both worlds, security and adventure, stability and passion. I was happier than I'd been in years, which actually made me better company for Chase. I was more patient with his predictable routines, more appreciative of his steady devotion, because I wasn't depending on him to fulfill every single emotional need I had. The only problem was that Ryan started wanting more time, more commitment, more of me than I was prepared to give. He'd get frustrated when I couldn't stay late or meet him on weekends, and I had to keep explaining that I had obligations, responsibilities that I couldn't just abandon. He knew I was married, obviously, but he seemed to think that meant I should be working toward leaving Chase, not maintaining both relationships indefinitely. Men always want to complicate perfectly good arrangements with their need to possess and control. I started getting a little sloppy with my phone, leaving it around the house while I showered or cooked dinner, not immediately deleting message threads the way I had been. Chase and I had been together for years, and he'd never shown any signs of being suspicious or possessive, so I didn't think I needed to be quite so paranoid about covering every single track. Besides, most of our text conversations were about work stuff anyway, with just enough personal content mixed in to maintain our connection. One evening in late 2019, I'd left my phone on the kitchen counter while I was getting ready for bed, and apparently Chase saw a message from Ryan that was more explicit than usual. I didn't know anything had happened until he served me with divorce papers 2 weeks later, completely out of nowhere, like some kind of ambush attack designed to humiliate me as much as possible. I was getting ready for work on a Tuesday morning when someone rang the doorbell, and suddenly I was being handed legal documents that accused me of adultery and demanded dissolution of our marriage. My first reaction was complete shock, then confusion about why Chase was being so dramatic about what was essentially a friendship that had gotten a little out of hand. When I confronted him, asking what he thought he was doing and why he was trying to destroy our marriage over nothing, he told me he knew everything, that he'd seen the messages, that he wasn't blind to what I'd been doing. He was calm in this weird, cold way that honestly scared me more than if he'd been yelling and throwing things like a normal person would. I tried to explain that whatever he thought he'd seen, he was blowing it completely out of proportion. Yes, Ryan and I were close. And yes, maybe we'd crossed some lines, but it was just a mistake. A stupid error in judgment that didn't mean anything compared to what Chase and I had together. I'd been with him for 6 years. Married for 3? Didn't that count for something? Wasn't our entire life together worth more than some meaningless fling that I was obviously willing to end immediately? But Chase wouldn't listen to reason. He'd already made up his mind to throw away everything we'd built together. And apparently he'd been planning this betrayal for weeks while pretending everything was normal between us. He'd talked to lawyers, gathered evidence, prepared his case, all while lying to my face about his intentions. If anyone should have felt betrayed, it should have been me. He'd been deceiving me far more deliberately than I'd ever deceived him. The divorce process was absolutely brutal. Chase demanded I move out of the townhouse immediately, even though I'd been living there for 3 years and had helped maintain and improve the property. When I explained to my lawyer that I deserved spousal support and at least partial ownership of our home, I discovered that Chase had owned the townhouse before our marriage, which meant I had no legal claim to it. He'd also been careful to keep most of his assets separate, which meant I wasn't entitled to the kind of settlement I'd expected after 3 years of marriage. I couldn't believe how vindictive he was being. This was the same man who'd spent years telling me he loved me, who'd promised to take care of me forever, who'd made me believe we were building a life together. Now he was using legal technicalities to make sure I walked away from our marriage with essentially nothing, just because his ego couldn't handle the fact that I'd found companionship elsewhere. He was willing to destroy both our lives just to punish me for being human and having needs he couldn't fulfill. The worst part was how quickly everything fell apart once word got out about the divorce. My workplace found out about my relationship with Ryan, and suddenly I was being called in for meetings about inappropriate conduct and violation of company policy. They demoted me from my management position back to basic retail, which meant my salary dropped from around $60,000 a year to barely above minimum wage. Ryan, who'd been so passionate and devoted when our relationship was secret and exciting, suddenly became distant and awkward now that there were real consequences involved. Within 6 months of Chase serving me papers, I'd lost my husband, my home, my career advancement, and my affair partner. Ryan stopped returning my calls once I lost my management position, and I realized he'd been just as interested in my status and financial stability as he had been in me personally. Chase had managed to destroy every good thing in my life. And for what? Because his pride couldn't handle sharing me with someone who actually appreciated my complexity and passion. I had to move into a tiny apartment across town, start over with a job that barely covered my basic expenses, and watch my entire social circle disappear as people chose sides in our divorce. Everyone acted like I was the villain in this situation, like I'd committed some unforgivable sin, instead of recognizing that Chase's vindictive overreaction had caused far more damage than my brief affair ever could have. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, I decided to reach out to Chase to see if enough time had passed for him to gain some perspective on what he'd done to both of us. I sent him a carefully worded message explaining how much I missed him, how sorry I was that things had gotten so out of hand, and how much I hoped we could find a way to repair the damage and rebuild what we'd had together. He didn't even respond, which was incredibly cruel, considering everything we'd meant to each other. As my financial situation got worse, I swallowed my pride and tried again, explaining that I was struggling and could really use his help getting back on my feet. I wasn't asking for charity. I was asking the man who'd once promised to love and support me forever to show some basic human compassion for someone he'd supposedly cared about. I told him I knew I didn't deserve his help, but asked him not to let me drown when he had the power to throw me a lifeline. His response was cold and final. "You made your choice when you betrayed me. I don't owe you anything." As if my mistake somehow erased 6 years of love and commitment. As if I hadn't given him the best years of my life. As if he had the right to just turn off his feelings like a faucet and pretend I'd never meant anything to him. 2 years after our divorce, I ran into him at the grocery store, and I was shocked by how good he looked. He'd lost weight, seemed relaxed and confident, and was clearly thriving in his new single life. Meanwhile, I was working double shifts just to afford basic groceries, driving a car that needed repairs I couldn't pay for, living in an apartment that was barely a step above a college dorm room. When I tried to make conversation, to show him that I was still the same person he'd fallen in love with, he was polite but distant. Like I was a stranger he was being forced to interact with out of social obligation. It's been several years now, and I still can't understand how someone who claimed to love me could be so completely heartless about my situation. I've tried reaching out periodically, explaining that I made the biggest mistake of my life letting him go, that I've learned from my errors and would never make the same choices again. But he's blocked me on every platform, changed his phone number, and made it clear that he has no interest in even maintaining a friendship with someone he once promised to love forever. I know people think I got what I deserved, that Chase was justified in his reaction, but they don't understand how complicated the situation really was. Yes, I made mistakes, but I was trying to balance everyone's needs and keep everyone happy. I never wanted to hurt Chase, and if he'd been willing to work through our problems instead of immediately running to a lawyer, we could have figured out a solution that didn't destroy both our lives. Instead, he chose to be vindictive and cruel, using his financial advantages and legal knowledge to make sure I lost everything while he walked away unscathed. He turned what should have been a private marital issue into a public humiliation that cost me my career, my home, and my financial security. And for what? Because his ego couldn't handle the fact that I'd found something with Ryan that was missing from our marriage. The most frustrating part is that Chase has apparently moved on completely, building a new life that doesn't include any acknowledgement of what we shared together. He's dating again, according to mutual acquaintances, and seems perfectly happy pretending that our 6 years together never happened. Meanwhile, I'm still dealing with the consequences of his vindictive choices, still struggling to rebuild everything he destroyed when he decided that punishing me was more important than preserving what we'd built together. I've had to accept that he's never going to forgive me, never going to acknowledge his role in destroying our marriage, never going to show any compassion for how much his choices have cost me. But I still believe that what we had was real and valuable, and I still think he made a terrible mistake throwing it all away over something that could have been resolved if he'd been willing to fight for our relationship instead of against it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if he'd confronted me directly instead of going behind my back to lawyers and divorce papers. If he'd been willing to work through our problems like adults, maybe we could have figured out why I'd been seeking excitement elsewhere and found ways to bring that passion back into our marriage. Instead, he chose the nuclear option, destroying everything we'd built together and making sure we'd both end up alone and bitter. I know I'll probably never stop missing what we had, or stop regretting that he wasn't willing to fight for our marriage the way he fought to end it. But I've learned that some people would rather be right than be happy. And Chase apparently decided that punishing me for my mistakes was more important than preserving the love we'd shared for 6 years. That's his choice to live with, just like my mistakes are mine.